Well, one thing I'll say about the SEC's general stance towards crypto is that it makes the environment much more rich for scammers because they are putting so much time, so many resources, so much attention on good actors.
Not a dividend.
It's a tale of two clans.
Now, your losses are on someone else's balance sheet.
Generally speaking, airdrops are kind of pointless anyways.
Unnamed trading firms who are very involved.
I like that ETH is the ultimate Ponzi.
DeFi protocols are the antidote to this problem.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chopping Block. Every couple of weeks, the four of us get together and give the industry insider's perspective on the crypto topics of the day. So quick intros. First, you got Tom, the DeFi maven and master of memes.
Hello, everyone.
Next, we've got Tarun, the Giga Brain and Grand Poobah at Gauntlet.
Yo.
Joining us today, we have special guest Rebecca Rettig, Protocol Policy Pro at Polygon.
I was wondering what my intro would be. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And I'm Haseeb, the head hype man at Dragonfly. So we're early stage investors in crypto, but I want to caveat that nothing we say here is investment advice, legal advice, or even life advice. Please see choppingblock.xyz for more disclosures. So Rebecca, we wanted to bring you on the show. You're something of an old hand within the crypto legal and policy world, and it's been a very chaotic week for crypto law. So there's two big stories that I want to cover that I think is going to take us quite a bit of time to get through. The first one, at this point, everybody in the world probably knows this. It's been front page news on pretty much every corner of the world, is the arrest of Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram. So let's back up a little bit and just talk high level about Pavel, Telegram, the history here, and why it's so significant that he was arrested in France. So Pavel Durov was originally the founder of VKontakte, which was the Facebook competitor in Russia. He ended up fleeing Russia after the Russian authorities wanted to basically get a bunch of information on users of VKontakte. And rather than comply, he decided to sell off his stake in the company and leave Russia. Then he founded Telegram. Telegram, of course, is a massive messaging service, has almost 1 billion users around the world. It's used very prominently in crypto, but in many countries such as Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, India, it's the dominant messaging platform. And it's been noted as being an important platform specifically for the Ukraine war, where a lot of information about what's happening in real time for folks who are in Russia or in Ukraine are coming through Telegram. So Telegram very famously has an anti-censorship policy across the board. And supposedly the Telegram, the company, has not been willing to comply with requests from law enforcement from around the world, not just in Europe, to dox users or to give information or to censor particular conversations, whether that applies to normal people, political dissidents, or whether it applies to criminals. And it's widely known that there are many criminal groups that use Telegram to engage in all sorts of chicanery. So Pavel Durov was in France, and he was, I think, transiting on a private jet when he was arrested, when he set foot in France on Saturday. And at first, it was unclear exactly what the charges were supposed to be and why he was arrested. But we now know that he's being charged with complicity in CSAM, or basically child pornography, narcotics distribution, terrorism, fraud, and then basically refusing to cooperate with French authorities when they were asking for, hey, can you take down this thing? Or, we don't know exactly what they were asking, but we can kind of infer that it was something about some kind of censorship of criminal activity on Telegram. Now, around the same time that this happened, it caused, first of all, a huge backlash around the world. One coming from nation states. So, many politicians actually putting pressure on France about, why is this happening? We've seen protests in different parts of the world. And we've also seen a lot of the tech intelligentsia speaking out in favor of Telegram and of, this sort of being an overreach of an attack on free speech by the French government. There also was, at the same time, of course, Telegram is associated with the Ton blockchain, which was a blockchain project that Telegram kind of adopted, let's say, originally from the Telegram white paper many, many years ago. And Ton actually has come down quite a bit since, something about 18 to 20% since Durov was arrested. It was also down, the blockchain itself was down for about 7 hours yesterday. I think that might have been a coincidence just because of some meme coin airdrop. But overall, it's been a very chaotic time, I understand, for Telegram and the Telegram team. So right now, we don't still know a ton. We just know the nature of the charges, but my understanding is that the specifics will take some while to unfurl. I think he's being arraigned and he's posted bail already, but he has to stay in France for the foreseeable future until we see how the French judiciary decides whether or not to move forward with these charges that have been unveiled against Pavel Durov. So I'm going to stop there. Rebecca, let's start with you. What was your reaction to these charges, and what do you feel like this portends for the sort of the free speech platforms and folks like Pavel, who are very free speech absolutists in the modern world?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think let's break it up into two parts of it, because I think there's a free speech part, and then I think there's an encryption part and both have a lot of implications in the crypto world. I certainly took it from a crypto stance, where there's a question about, and we talk about this a lot in crypto law and policy and have for many years, well, is just creating and hosting a social media platform or other sort of tech platform put you in the line of fire for potential criminal charges and the like. Some of that seems here, and a little bit, especially because you're in the EU and it's a much less transparent process than it is in the United States, harken back to what's happening with Pertsev in the Netherlands, one of the Tornado Cash developers, which is you don't have tons of transparency into what's going on. They talked a lot about how a lot of the investigation is secret. It's been secret since March, and supposedly this investigation has been going on a long time. But I think it also goes really far back, if we want to take it back into tech law, into things like Napster and Grokster, and what state of mind you have to have when you're creating a certain type of technological app, and how you can be found to be complicit in whether it's criminal activity or, violations of civil law, like they were in Napster and Grokster. So that was my first reaction to it, which is, this ventures into where's the line between creating software that's used by bad people versus being complicit in it. And I think the complicity charges were really big. There's another little small piece to the charges about encryption. I don't think we have as much clarity into that, but there are import and export rules all over the world, but including in the EU, around encryption. They've been in place in sort of the late 90s, and whether there is a part here where they're going to try to get him on some technicality where they didn't register importing encrypted technology into France. I don't think we have a lot of clarity around that, but I did see like a brief mention of the encryption point, and that's important when you think about what we're all building in crypto as well.
That's bizarre. Didn't we used to have something like that in the 90s, right? And then we got it repealed of these export controls on cryptography, no?
We have a little bit of it still in the US. It's not totally repealed unless I've missed that part.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
But yeah, I think to your point, this was part of the whole crypto war in the 90s, is that, some of this public cryptography was considered munitions. And so, this was going back to whole, Adam Back and cypherpunks and kind of the OG thing there. I think I also noticed that in the charges, but yeah, I don't know enough about French law to know what is and is not allowed. I think there's also kind of this thread that's been going around on crypto Twitter, which is, I think, you can kind of come at this from two angles. One is, hey, this is anti-free speech, anti-censorship. I think the other angle that's kind of maybe more nuanced is, well, technically, conversations on Telegram are not end-to-end encrypted. They do have that feature that you can opt into, but ultimately Telegram still retains a key for decrypting conversations, and they shard it and try to make it difficult to access and make it so that, hey, one single actor cannot go and decrypt all the messages, but they have that master key, they retain it. And so, I think you kind of look at this and you think, oh, it's like Signal or, encrypted email, but it's not kind of quite one-to-one, in that as long as you have this access, like you are going to be, someone's going to try to point a gun to your head and make you try to use it. And I think that is part of the complication here.
I mean, if you look at the tornado case, it kind of doesn't matter whether or not you have the key. The government's going to point a gun to your head and make you try to claim that there's some mechanism by which you can try to do it. So I take the point that Telegram is built differently than Signal, and it is, in a way, maybe this is some vindication of the fact that, okay, if you give yourself the ability to be able to decrypt the messages, of course you're going to face tremendous pressure to use that tool that you have built into your protocol. And this is one of the forms of that tremendous pressure. I think it's also worth clarifying for some folks who haven't been following the story. So I mentioned some of the charges of, terrorism and narcotics and child pornography. Obviously, Pavel Durov himself is not being accused of being in some kind of direct conspiracy to commit those things. It's that his, Telegram, the service, harbors people who are participating in these kinds of crimes, and he is not cooperating in giving up these groups to French authorities or decrypting the messages or whatever it is exactly that they're asking him for. I think it is it's one of these things, we see the same thing with Elon Musk, where Elon Musk is trying to take this, very strong free speech stance with X. And that works in the context of an American set of values and American jurisprudence. I think there's a lot of latitude to fight back and, claim that, hey, the government interest here in, getting information about these people is not strong enough to overcome the natural free speech rights of individuals. But it's just not true around the world, right? Like there are very, very different notions of free speech in different countries, and in many countries they don't even have the concept of free speech. That is not considered to be a right given to people. And so, using these platforms to export this very Western notion of free speech into an international platform with billions of users is just going to hit a wall at some point, and this is one of those walls. What's surprising about this is not that there's a government that's really mad at Telegram and tried to arrest Pavel Durov. The thing that's so weird is that it's France, right? Like you would expect this to be, it's Kazakhstan or something. It's like some I don't know, nothing against Kazakhstan, but like, some country that has very authoritarian values and doesn't believe in, free speech and free expression. But you would think like France, like the French Revolution, all that stuff, like it very clearly embraces these values in a deep way. I think we're sort of seeing this. We saw Macron, the president, go on Twitter and basically say like, look, just so everybody knows, like this wasn't me. This is not the government. This is, the machinery of justice is happening on its own. We have no ability to intercede here. I'm just like very, very curious how all this is playing out behind the scenes. There was some reporting as well talking about how Macron himself apparently personally uses Telegram. And even though like many folks in the French government don't use Telegram because they don't consider it to be particularly safe, or like, I don't know, they prefer Signal maybe or something. But Macron himself is a Telegram user. So and supposedly, so Durov has French citizenship. He's a UAE and French citizen. Presumably he's renounced his Russian citizenship because everyone keeps reporting he doesn't have Russian citizenship. The weird thing supposedly is that Macron gave him his French citizenship. And so Macron gave him his French citizenship. Macron is a Telegram user. And then France arrests him when he drops his private jet into France. So just a very weird pattern of facts, and it does make me think that there's something more than meets the eye to this story from a political perspective.
Yeah, I think there's part of it. I'll put on my just like traditional lawyer hat and say, I think when we talk about the free speech aspect of it, it's the extension of this type of case. But when you actually look at the charges themselves, they're pretty nuanced. Like, you'd hope that they have. And as we've seen in the Pertsev case, they don't necessarily have. And we don't have the same sort of legal process in Europe that we're used to in the United States. But you'd hope that they have like real evidence to tie him to actual distribution of child pornography versus knowledge that it was being used, right? Like those are the distinctions that I think we should really focus on, like knowledge after the fact that the application you've built and are continuing to build is being used for bad things, which by the way, Google probably is too, right? Underage people are using Google to figure out how to buy guns, right? So, whatever you think about that, but like technology can be used in bad ways. But I really do think these old cases are really important, which is how much did you know, especially when you're bringing criminal charges against someone. So like, yes, the implications are very wide ranging, both for free speech and for what we're building in crypto. But if you look like deep down and think, well, hopefully they have evidence to back up what they're actually trying to charge him with. Otherwise, they are just venturing into the free speech world.
Tarun, what's your take on the whole Durov situation?
I think in general, this has been the sentiment in Europe the last, I want to call it 3 to 5 years, probably since the pandemic really it accelerated, that platforms need to be controlled and our local laws should apply globally effectively. Like I feel like there's a little bit of this manifest social destiny type of thing that Europe is trying to pull on everyone. It has not been successful so far. So, pretty much every other social media company has given them the middle finger. So I feel like they went for the weakest link. Even though Telegram obviously not social media, but they're trying to like treat it in the language that's used is very similar to the kind of social media language. And there's no like Section 230 equivalent in most of Europe. And I kind of just view Europe as this authoritarian place nowadays anyway. So it's like, I'm not really that surprised to see this versus, other parts of the world. And I'm sure maybe there's something behind the scenes, but I actually think this is just more the frustration of Europe being, like, they've tried all these AI laws that haven't worked and people have just been getting around them. Like, B, they've tried to go after Facebook and Google and Twitter, and like clearly none of that has worked either. So I feel like this is like, hey, who do we beat up on the playground? We go for the smallest, easiest target. And that's kind of what this looks like to me.
Yeah. It does feel like, I mean, there was a lot of calls on Twitter for essentially, sort of boycotting France from a tech perspective, or just even not serving French customers.
Well, I will say
French
the crypto Twitter thing about not having ETHCC in Paris, I think is a very fair thing.
Yeah, that'll show them. Yeah, France will think twice.
But I feel like it is.
Nice. Okay.
No, what I was going to say is, I mean, to Tarun's point, they actually have a full data protection law that they put in very recently called the Data Act. And they put in this small little, if we're talking about crypto stuff, this small little provision that smart contracts have to have a kill switch. And there was a lot of pushback against that. Now, they say it's only in very narrow circumstances and for very specific types of, like, it's not meant to capture all of DeFi, right? It's not meant to capture everything in crypto. But to Tarun's point, they are being very expansive. And when we look at Mika, and everyone was lauding it as, oh, great, we have regulatory clarity. I'm not sure, given that it's in the EU and how they have been treating technology and data and generally, that it will be used in the regulatory clarity way that we're all hoping it will.
So, okay, do we think the situation has broader consequences for crypto, for our industry? So obviously this wasn't directly related to crypto, although Telegram does a lot of crypto stuff through Ton.
I mean, the most direct consequence was all the Ton liquidations over the weekend.
Well, weirdly, Ton has actually been rallying over the last few days, even though the rest of the market has been kind of treading water.
Like right after the news came out, crazy a swing. So,
right, but at least with to Rebecca's point, to the implications, I think, around privacy.
For sure, I was
where the pendulum is swinging. No, I got you. But it does feel like the pendulum is swinging in a strongly anti-privacy direction. And if we basically think now that, like, hey, to be a privacy oriented or kind of free speech maximalist or censorship resistance maximalist means that you are now really exposing yourself to tremendous legal risk. It makes it a lot harder for founders to embrace this concept in a full-throated way. Now, there have been concessions to things like, proof of innocence. If you remember, there was Vitalik had this big write-up about it. I know Railgun, which is a privacy protocol on Ethereum, has incorporated this kind of proof of innocence mechanic, such that you can essentially prove that you are within when you redeem from a privacy pool or you exit a sort of tornado-like pool, you can prove that you are within a set of legitimate users or KYC / not evil people without revealing any more information than that about yourself, using zero knowledge proofs and general moon mathy type stuff. So I am seeing more things like that, and maybe we see the extension of those concepts to other things within end-to-end encrypted communication. Is that you can prove certain things about your conversations, and maybe even the service itself can prove certain things about your conversation without actually being able to read the contents. So we may see more of this kind of selective or configurable privacy, as opposed to this all the way privacy that ends up just causing, folks like the EU to just throw up in their mouths and start arresting people. What are you guys' thoughts about this concept of more of a sliding scale of privacy being the new default?
I think the question is, how do you actually achieve that, right? Like in the zero knowledge proof, example, okay, maybe there's some actually trustless private way to like prove that I'm not engaging in something illicit, but generally this looks like a dragnet, right? It's sort of like, like the Snowden NSA stuff, where it's like, we're just going to scoop up all the information and then we will pick through it and look at what we actually want. And I think that is almost kind of the issue with Telegram, right? Is normally on something unencrypted like a Facebook or Instagram, great, we can just run algorithms to search through all the data, find the stuff that we don't like, and then go after those people. Here it's like, well, you're kind of keeping the data in this cellar in a locked box. It's kind of a pain in the ass to get to, so you can't automatically go through it and scan and find the stuff that you want to sort of pick out. Maybe there is a way to do that in a way such that it's kind of deterministic and it's not just sort of this carte blanche access to user data that I think governments actually want. But it's not really clear to me how you would go about doing that. Again, I think maybe Railgun is kind of like the closest attempt.
And without knowing in advance who you're supposed to be going after, I think it is pretty difficult to achieve. In American jurisprudence, there's a concept of prior restraint, which says that you can't tell people what they're not allowed to say in advance, in most cases, and it's sort of a facts and circumstances thing of when somebody is actually engaging in speech that is illegal. And I don't know, Rebecca, am I just totally torturing that concept?
No, but I wanted to bring it back to this whole question back to Tarun's invocation of 230, right, which is a law in the US, which basically says, if you just host a website and you don't do anything, you're not going to be liable for like random posts. But there's a corollary to this, which is if you are curating content and things like that, and you're actually monitoring what's on your site, there is liability, right? And so I think the same thing in theory should apply. It's the same thing that I think about whether you like hold an admin key versus no admin key, right? Over a protocol. If you are doing something proactive to be able to see what's going on, and I actually think that having all the data in the seller isn't a proactive thing. It's just like you're hosting the data. And so maybe you have to comply with a subpoena, but like you're not necessarily complicit. Then I think you need to have a sliding scale of liability there, which 230 does, right? If you're really actively involved and you're seeing it come through, then you actually have real legal obligations versus if you're just hosting a website, totally different type of obligations.
Yeah. Okay. So very interesting to see. I actually kind of think that France is going to find a way to try to de-escalate. I know that obviously they didn't have to press charges at the end of the arrest, and some people were surprised that they did go ahead and press the charges. But I sort of suspect that they're going to be getting a lot of international pressure to chill out and maybe turn this into something more along the lines of, hey, you didn't comply with our subpoenas. Here's a big fine. Like, don't do that again, as opposed to putting him on criminal trial for like child pornography. And I don't know. I just think it would be such a circus in France, seeing this much pressure from the France economy is not in a great state. So I think seeing this much pressure internationally from all these kind of tech moguls of saying, oh my God, this is an assault on freedom and free speech and criminalizing technology. I think that France is going to back down from the worst parts of these charges.
I actually I'd be willing to at least place a small bet on the other direction, and that they want to go after someone because they've been like losing all these other attempts. And this one they have sort of, I wouldn't call it bird in hand, but they at least have bird in jail. So it's like, or like house arrest. And so it's like, okay, well, we can actually go after this case. Versus like, okay, we've tried to do all these AI laws and subpoena Sam Altman to come to Europe, and then he gives us a middle finger. It's like, I really feel like there is a kind of like, don't underestimate the like ego issues involved. At least that's my personal feeling.
It's just so non-strategic for France, right? Like, what exactly is the upside?
But personal ego or like nationalistic ego is very different than rational thinking.
It's also not like France is like a tech center that we're all going to and like everyone's going to take their companies and move them out of France because of this. And I think, all of us lawyers, when we talk about MiCA, are like, and they didn't do a great job with Web 2 and they're continuing down that path. So they don't have anything. So to Tarun's point, it's kind of like, what do they have to lose?
I think they have plenty to lose in that, the economy is not doing amazing. And they are spending a lot of money to try to attract entrepreneurs to France, right? I mean, Paris is giving out tremendous incentives to entrepreneurs to move there. It's not successful in getting a lot of entrepreneurs there, but I think they realize, like, look, we're just going to burn our reputation internationally by prosecuting this very, very, very high profile case that is also has foreign policy consequences for France. And I think like if the answer was like, well, we can't get them to reply or subpoenas about narcotics investigations, I'm like, just the scale is just way, way, way off for this. And I think my guess is that they didn't anticipate how big of a firestorm this would be, right? Otherwise, why is Macron on Twitter trying to do damage control for France?
Yeah, I think to your point too, I think companies will just continue to opt out if they feel like it's not worth the hassle or it's impossible to comply with some of the regulations. I mean, you're already seeing this with the new iOS that's coming out. A lot of the features are not going to be available in the EU because Apple's like, well, we can't build these things in compliance with the AI regulations that you built. So you're just not going to get it at all. And it's not really worth the money or the time or the effort to go about doing that. And I think that's kind of what happens when you maybe overplay your hand.
And to be fair, I'm as much as it's very easy to dunk on France here, it's also equally easy to dunk on the US in the same way. And that, like, I bet for instance, the California SB 1047 law that for AI that passed yesterday will make stuff not happen in California for sure. Like, I mean, why, if I were a founder, it's like the dumbest.
That is very different. That is very different. California is a massive economy.
My point is I kind of think like there's kind of a very big similarity between the kind of ego aspects of like how the enforcement and regulation was done in both of these cases, and it wasn't totally done in a way that I think is purely rational according to law. And so like that's why I think maybe your reasoning about this is if you're assuming that there's a purely rational intent here, and I'm just not convinced that's true.
I think in the beginning stages, it can be, sort of driven by one tentacle of government. And then all of a sudden, the rest of the body wakes up and is like, oh shit, there's much larger consequences to what happened here. And I think you just see it all the time in history, is that there's sort of one kind of narrow body that decides that it's in its self-interest to do X. And then they realize like, oh my God, there's just way, way larger consequences to what we've just done. And ideally, the rest of the body kind of pulls back this tentacle and says, hey, so, hold on, let's, I don't know, just seeing like some of the prisoner exchange stuff that was just done between the US and Russia to get back Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter. Like, we handed back to them like this guy who just like murdered a political opponent of Putin in broad daylight in Germany. And they were like, okay, yeah, well, we'll give you him back. Like,
yeah, it was. Let's say the U.S. definitely did not win the negotiation in that one.
Well, that's the thing, is like we just didn't care, right? It just doesn't rate compared to getting back a Wall Street Journal journalist. And so I think in the same way, like Pavel Durov is an international hero to many, many people. Both in the West and especially so in Eastern Europe, in Russia, and in the geographies where they use
I do
Telegram
think
all the time.
Thing is the only government that has said anything is the UAE. And I think he technically has 3 citizens.
No, Russia as well. No,
Yeah.
Russia as well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Russia also interceded. Yeah, which is obviously
I just meant like
hugely important to France.
I don't
Although
know
I think there were reports that he didn't want the UAE's help, and he asked them not to intervene.
Interesting.
Oh, is that right? Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, so we moving on from this story, let's talk about another tentacle of government, which is the SEC. So OpenSea, the NFT platform that once upon a time was the dominant venue for trading NFTs, announced on Wednesday that they had received a Wells notice from the SEC. A Wells notice, we've seen a few of these now. Wells notice is a notification from the SEC that they plan to sue you for something, and it gives you a venue to give a response. But usually if you receive a Wells notice, you're getting a lawsuit. So they claimed that the reason why the SEC is suing them is because the SEC claims that there are unregistered securities that are being traded on OpenSea or were being traded on OpenSea at some time. We don't know the details of what a potential suit might include. This has caused, once again, a lot of furor on social media about, is OpenSea an exchange? Despite the fact that OpenSea, of course, is non-custodial. There are smart contracts on the blockchain that actually custody the funds. The swaps are all done peer-to-peer, but it does take a fee. It does editorialize listings, and it does, co-market with many of the NFTs that are traded on the platform. So much like with the SEC against Coinbase and Kraken, in this case, they decided to go after. They've gone after a few issuers. They went after Stoner Cats. They went after another one called Impact Theory, but they've been very sparing on actually going after NFT issuers. And instead, it looks like the SEC strategy is to go after the big guy, the exchange. And of course, one of the advantages is that you can allege that certain assets that were traded on OpenSea is unregistered security, and you only have to prove one in order to prove that this thing was should have registered as an exchange. And the having an unregistered security without having the issuer of that unregistered security be a defendant in the case also in a sense makes it easier to go after the industry on the whole, without the issuers being able to defend themselves, make their case, and show up in court as a like, hey, I'm an artist or I'm a creator and I'm legitimately creating art, those people aren't a party to the case. And so if the SEC says, aha, this person clearly was making an unregistered security, that person can't show up and defend themselves. So we still don't know, again, the details, but some people claimed that there may have been a connection because about 24 hours before the SEC Wells notice was announced by OpenSea, Trump launched a new NFT collection. And I believe this was on Polygon, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. So he launched a third NFT collection on Polygon, and within 24 hours, the Wells notice was announced to OpenSea. So TBD if there's any connection there. Might be a coincidence, but knowing crypto Twitter, we love to speculate.
I think that's a coincidence. I have no reason to think otherwise. Before you get a Wells, you usually have a very, very long investigation and run up before they issue anything like that. I think there are so many problems with this. One, saying all NFTs that are being traded on OpenSea are securities is a huge leap, and it goes
But they don't have to establish that.
So I don't think I agree with you on that. And I think I've thought about this a lot in the Coinbase case because, okay, that one NFT is a security, we'll delist it. And now we have thousands of others you have to go. The same is true on Coinbase, Robinhood, Kraken, Binance, all of these other cases. Like you can delist the one they prove and then you're not a securities exchange, right? And so I actually don't think it's as easy as showing one. Maybe if you showed one, you say we delist and we pay a small fine, but you don't shut down the entire exchange, right? And so they actually have a much bigger hill to climb in all the exchange cases than I think a lot of people in the industry think. I think the other piece of this, though, is this flies in the face of both so many court cases at this point, including the Kraken case that just came out that said the underlying crypto assets themselves are not investment contracts. And so I think on the NFT front, that's the underlying crypto asset. So that's not the investment contract. Now, we don't know what they've alleged yet, right? No complaint. We haven't seen what the Wells notice says. And we know in the crypto case, in most crypto cases.
So Rebecca, can you flesh out this distinction? Because I think it's a fairly subtle one. The idea is, what does it mean that the token is not a security, but the investment contract is a security?
Sure.
What are those two things pointing at?
Yeah, so great question. So I think we can all agree these underlying crypto assets, just the tokens themselves, are software. And the SEC, most of the court cases that have been coming out now really acknowledge that, right? We started with Ripple, like XRP itself is not a security. But what they said in the Ripple case is, well, when you had these agreements with your investors out at the outset, where you said, we're going to give you, we're selling you this SAFT or contract for you to buy XRP, and we're going to ensure that the token goes up. It's not the token that's the investment contract. It's the agreement between the issuer or the company and the investors, right? So you really have to prove that the transactions themselves are securities transactions and not the underlying assets. It's this crazy concept, right? Like, oh, the oranges weren't securities, but the contracts in Howey to sell the orange groves were the investment contracts. So what I think, though, is so flagrant is that the SEC is now going against almost all the court cases that they've seen in district court and what they've been saying a lot privately, or even when you have ex-SEC officials on panels now, they're like, no, we're not saying that the underlying crypto assets are the securities. And so the SEC sort of loves to change the goalposts, all the time. And I think they are really stretching the securities laws well beyond anything we have seen in this case and in other ongoing investigations that the securities laws were not meant to protect this kind of activity in particular.
Okay, so let me try to steelman the SEC's case. Obviously, we don't know the details of the SEC's allegations here, but we're just going to kind of infer what they probably are. We've seen many NFTs that are just kind of obviously, we're going to do this mint, and with this mint, we're going to build stuff that's going to make the NFT ecosystem more valuable. And many of these NFTs they had royalties that were going back to the teams, and they were very often explicitly funding some particular thing that they were going to do with the NFT sales. Okay, so and many of those you saw that OpenSea would explicitly not list them. If they felt like, wow, this is very security-like, we're not going to allow this to trade on OpenSea. But a lot of them, they just kind of got through because, whatever, it's Wild West. There's a ton of projects and you can't monitor everything perfectly. So, so the SEC alleges that there were certain securities that were just like, come on. If you look at this thing, very clearly this is a security. They're trying, they're a business fundraising using NFTs. And in these kinds of cases, I think the SEC has a reasonably strong leg to stand on that. Hey, you were listing and allowing to trade unregistered securities, and there were just so many tokens on your platform that you weren't monitoring exactly how many of these were compliant and which ones are not compliant, and maybe the standards by which you were choosing to not list certain assets were very lazy or loose or something along these lines. I think that might be the allegations that the SEC advances. And there, to your point about, okay, well, is it the token itself or the NFT itself that is an unregistered security, or is it the investment contract? Well, the issuers have a very strong interest in getting the secondary market to, do well and to appreciate, right? Even if, okay, I initially made my money in the mint, but NFT, OpenSea very famously was enforcing royalties, right? They were enforcing royalties for creators, which meant that all of the trades on the platform, like the value of the NFTs on the secondary market, was very important to the issuers of these platforms. And OpenSea was sending the royalties to them in a way that was not enforced on the blockchain.
Okay, so maybe those types of, and I don't know every transaction and what contracts even OpenSea had with some of the issuers, like those things, if there were lots of accoutrement around it, maybe you could say those few types of transactions were securities transactions. And we'll have to see what the complaint says, because it sounds like OpenSea is going to fight. So we'll see a complaint getting filed. I think the other thing that this shows is that the SEC is trying to game out where it gets favorable decisions versus not, because you have this NFT case, this impact litigation that was brought affirmatively by the Song a Day man in Texas. And that's a very favorable jurisdiction. People think the Fifth Circuit's very favorable. If they file against OpenSea, they're going to do it in the Northern District of California, presumably, because that's where OpenSea is. And they've gotten really good decisions. The SEC's gotten really good decisions for them out of the Northern District of California. So they're gaming this all out.
I think OpenSea's in New York, aren't they?
They have an office in New York, but I thought they also had an office in San Francisco. Maybe they don't anymore. They've gotten mixed decisions. Well, then, regardless, they've gotten mixed decisions out of New York too. They're just trying to game it out. I mean, the overall point still stands that they're just trying to, I think, game the system. And when they get decisions in district courts they don't like, they try the same thing again somewhere else, right? Like Consensus, or they got a great decision for them on they got a bad decision for them on broker for wallet in the Coinbase case. And so they've now filed separate charges in a different district against Consensus, also alleging that wallet is a broker, because they just don't like the one that they got. And so they keep saying like, well, I don't know why the industry isn't, following some of these district court cases. And it's like, well, but you aren't either. So, I think we are in a very, I agree with you, Haseeb. There are good arguments to be made for certain types of transactions, but I don't think we can take these blanket allegations from the SEC as we've been seeing them do.
And if the SEC prevails on some of these arguments, the remedy is, okay, we'll delist those assets that you proved are securities, essentially, no?
Some of them. To your point, I think it'll be hard, because let's say you pick 6 NFT collections, right? They're not going to pick the thousands and thousands that are on there. I don't think, even if they got a favorable decision on 6, that would shut down OpenSea in its entirety. The same is true for the exchange cases, right? There are like 8 to 12 crypto assets or transactions in crypto assets being alleged in the exchange cases. Those also aren't going to shut down the exchanges too. So these are very hard cases for them to win in some broad brushstrokes. And so I think they are trying to put a lot of pressure on the industry, including in private. There's a lot of private investigations still going on that are well outside of the NFT context or anything else we've seen, because, they're trying to get wins in enforcement too. Right.
I think the weird thing about this whole story is that, we'll see what happens when we actually see the allegations from the SEC, but I suspect that, we've had a lot of debates during the NFT heyday about royalty enforcement and about the sort of the wisdom and the virtue of royalties. And I think this might have, my guess is that I think the royalty concept is actually going to end up biting the industry in the ass, because of the fact that it ties the issuer to the secondary market. and makes that secondary market integral to the business of the issuer. In a way that normally is not the case, right? Like you make the argument about baseball cards and like, oh, paintings and da-da-da. And it's like, yeah, well, paintings don't have this concept that the issuer has an interest in the growth and the trading and the volumes of the secondary market. It becomes part and parcel of that person's business to ensure that there's continued trading and speculation on these assets.
It will help prove a common enterprise, right? That second Howey factor in a way that I don't think they have it with the exchanges, with the typical exchanges.
Yeah, but ironically, something like Blur, which does not enforce royalties, doesn't have this problem.
Yeah.
So,
and look, the one thing I'll say about the SEC's general stance towards crypto is that it makes the environment much more rich for scammers because they are putting
that's
so much time, so many resources, so much attention on good actors, right? Like, whatever you want to say, you may not agree with the way OpenSea enforced royalties or not. They were trying to do it right, and they were trying to build in the US. You're right. I've been to their New York office, and they're doing it out in the open, transparently, doing their best. They had real lawyers, same with all the exchanges. And yet there are plenty of scams still going on, and nobody is enforcing that. And quite frankly, they probably missed a lot of those as well. So I think it is just really perverse incentives.
Yeah, I think there's two things I'd say. First is it's funny that the only NFT exchange that has no token somehow is the only one that's persecuted. That's like
classic SEC move.
Yeah. The second thing, not to kind of go back to your claim about conspiracy theories. My favorite conspiracy theory I read was that Trump had advanced notice of the Wells notice and wanted to make crypto people like him. So he put out the NFT collection right before to make it so that people couldn't tell. It's like the reverse of the conspiracy you said. I was reading that yesterday and I really started laughing.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. I think he's done this like his third time.
As in he launched it timing wise right before.
So I see.
People would kind of conflate the time, in the way that was said earlier.
Yeah. It does seem like, as much as the SEC talks about being technology agnostic, like I think, again, you can make a lot of these arguments around the traditional art world. Like if you're buying art from a gallery, generally they have like a ROFR or restrictions on sales and like a lot of things that do actually impact the secondary market that are obviously designed to ideally support the price of the painting. And so, is that really materially different than putting it on chain and having recommendations even around royalties or limiting where something can trade? It just feels a little ridiculous.
I mean, I go back to the exchange that Gensler had with Richie Torres in that hearing where he said, is a Pokemon card a security? And Gensler said, no. And he said, well, if I put it on the blockchain, is it a security? He said, it might be. Right. Like I just, and I don't think he was thinking about the royalty point in that, but maybe you guys are thinking about that.
Yeah. No. Look, to be clear, I'm, in advancing or sort of sketching out these arguments, I'm not actually sympathetic to them. I think that, it's just so obviously opportunistic, and that now that the NFT cycle is over, NFTs aren't cool anymore. You're not going to piss that many people off, or not that much of the electorate cares anymore about NFTs because the cycle has come and gone. Now, when it's way too late to actually protect anyone, and NFTs have come down already in like 90% in value from the market highs, now you're going to go after OpenSea? Like, really?
I mean that, but also on the political front, we're at August 29th. They have an end date at the SEC to like bring cases as September 30th. That's a big date for them. So I don't think this is the only thing we're going to see between now and September 30th.
Wait, so
will piss off everybody else.
But they haven't actually brought the case yet. The case yet. They've only sent out the Wells notice. Yeah.
Can I ask a dumb question? Why is September 30th
It's just their internal calendars. It's a big, I guess, end
government
of
work,
date.
Man.
Yeah.
But that just seems so arbitrary that they're like, we're going to stop.
Welcome to government, baby. Welcome to government.
A little over a month before the election.
No, it's not for this year. It's every year.
Oh, it's every. Okay, got it. Then that.
Okay,
I thought it was like
No, it's every year.
Yeah. Well, OpenSea has now joined the the vaunted status of companies that are being sued by the SEC. Basically, it's kind of like it's both a marker of just like really, really flagrant incompetent scams. Like the really competent scams, the SEC just like never touches them. So it's only like the really kind of bumbling scammers that actually end up getting caught by the SEC, and then just the best companies in the space. So it's kind of this weird, like they should just put a little marker of like, we've been sued by the SEC, you can trust us, or we're, maybe a totally incompetent scammer. There's kind of the two classes that the SEC likes to go after these days. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, there's a story going around right now about the Ethereum Foundation, and it comes from an interchange on Twitter by Vitalik. So sort of started with Vitalik, who's in some Twitter argument with some Twitter anons talking about DeFi on Ethereum. And Vitalik seemingly showed that he was not very sympathetic to DeFi on Ethereum, claiming that he said, well, DeFi, there are certain things I like. I like Polymarket. I like, RAI, which is a tiny stablecoin with like $10 million market cap or something. And I think DEXs are great, but where does all this yield in DeFi come from? It feels like an Ouroboros, meaning a snake eating its own tail. It feels like this is all very cyclical, circular. It's going to break. I don't really trust it. And this caused a lot of people to get very upset. And this idea that, hey, you sort of birthed this category, DeFi. If you look in the early Ethereum, you look at the Ethereum white paper, it talks about DeFi, talks about DEXs, talks about, all these, these sort of fledgling concepts that have now, blossomed into this industry. And Vitalik doesn't seem to like it, doesn't seem to think it's very cool. Dankrad came in and said along those lines, we want a value-based DeFi sector that is positive sum, not zero sum. And it seems like, many folks within the EF seem to share this sentiment that, hey, Ethereum and crypto should really be about, public goods and, kind of putting cryptography back in the hands of users and encrypted messaging and, quadratic voting, as opposed to what it's predominantly used for, which is, stable coins, DeFi, trading, and these kind of stuff. On the other hand, there was other criticism toward the EF. There was news over the last couple of weeks that the EF has been selling a large quantum of the ether that they have on the balance sheet. They sold something on the order of about 100 million that they sent to Kraken to sell. And people were like, wait, why is the EF selling so much? And Aya Miyaguchi, who is I believe the executive director of the Ethereum Foundation, said that that was to cover their budget. And their budget supposedly is about $100 million a year, which got people very, very upset that why is the EF spending so much money? Is 100 million way too much money? Some people said, well, no, actually 100 million is very reasonable given the scale of Ethereum. So I want to take that just kind of constellation of drama that we see playing out and get a reaction. Tarun, let's start with you. I see you're sort of grinning to yourself about your views on the situation.
I think my problem is I agree with both parties in this sense, in that like there is some truth to the unsustainable yield piece, but I would argue that in 2024 that has been shriveled compared to where it was, anywhere near where it was in 2021. I think most of this stems from someone like Vitalik. Well, Vitalik definitely uses on-chain stuff, right? You can see his address. He's very, there's a lot of these. But someone like Dankrad, I feel like I don't know if advocating for RWAs over everything else, that's just like idiotic, right? Like in reality, if you believe ETH has any value, then you should believe there are other assets that can also have that value that are not intrinsically tied to some off-chain thing, that are tied based on their usage, that can be valued based on their usage. I found the Dankrad argument the most non-credible one and kind of a little bit off-putting. I think Vitalik's is a lot more nuanced, and I think a lot of it stems from like 2021 and like kind of not where we are now, where it's like, it's much harder to kind of bootstrap liquidity. There's a real cost to each new token. There's a reason all these points haven't converted to tokens, etc. Right? Like that. I think the market the market might be not instantly efficient at pricing these things, but it does price them eventually. But on the other hand, the budget stuff, I mean, I don't know who you really think that's overspending for like an endowment, nonprofit foundation type thing. I mean, look, there are more AI startups that have raised more than $100 million that have shut down or kind of been sold for parts in less time than a year. So like we can't really be I think that's a little bit crazy because like they do really fund a lot of core research. I think the main thing people are mad about is like, if I own ETH and I'm staking it, what am I getting for staking it? You know, the narrative was like, I got all these fees, I got all this MEV, there's this burn, right? There's like some implicit value accrual. And arguably, the value accrual is just going to the L2s, which is fine. That was a choice that was made. But people who hold ETH are obviously not so happy that they're not seeing number go up. And like there's inherently this tension. That's actually the funny part about reading these arguments, right? Is like, if you look in the comments, it's like all of these people who are super, you know, hey, Ethereum needs to have all this value, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they're just like, hey, we want number to go up. And on the other side, you see people who are like, hey, well, you know, here's kind of this roadmap that's like a little bit ambiguous. And by a little bit, I mean quite a bit. And we're going to need to spend a lot of money on it. And also, we think all your applications are stupid, right? And like they both like have some valid points, but they both are talking past
Our
each
applications
other.
are pretty stupid. Yeah.
And they both are talking past each other in such a way that I feel like it's like, I don't think there's a reconciliation that will happen here. I think the reconciliation will just be the market, you know, kind of choosing a kind of dictum. But I will say, I think actually Haseeb and I were at this conference the other day where everyone there was like, you know, and these are people who probably couldn't tell you what an L2 is. Was like, we're basically kind of shilling the long Solana, short Ethereum trade, which is like insanely crowded right now. I mean, if you look at the open interest on it, it's like it is kind of insane. And I think that can only last for so long. So I think there's also some like financially driven psyops going on that people are not willing to admit to.
Tom, what's your take here?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Haseeb. I think people love to cherry pick specific examples, even like in the OpenSea thing, where it's like, this is a very, you know, acute example of where someone was wrong. Out of all the times they were right, or they said good things or did the right thing, and I'm going to sort of hammer on it. And like, you know, people forget the EF gave, you know, Uniswap when, you know, their initial grant, and obviously like DeFi is working on Ethereum. Yeah, I mean, I agree with the broad point, which is like, if you think a, you know, permissionless decentralized form of internet money is valuable, which I think most people would agree it has some sort of value, it's a unique application, probably going to be financial services around it, and that's kind of where DeFi comes in. So it doesn't mean that, you know, RWA stuff is not interesting or valuable. I think obviously it is, and you know that also has its
the
own place
irony
in the
is
market,
our resident RWA person isn't here to defend RWAs.
It's true. It's true. So yeah, I just think people want to get mad. It's kind of in the market doldrums, and people are bored and arguing with each other on Twitter.
Rebecca, what do you think?
I agree on all that. I mean, I love DeFi. It's actually one of the things that I think has the most promise in the space. But I also agree that many of the ways it's developed since 2019, 2020 are not what I think those of us who are around then had hoped, right? There is this I call it self-referential, whatever you said about the snake eating its tail, right? There's a lot of that and a lot of the yield and all of that stuff. But I think there are some really, really useful applications. And so if we can just drill down on those, and Uniswap being one of them, sort of building in that way. What I'll say, as I was listening to you guys, what I was thinking about is this is another example where the incentives are really perverse from a regulatory perspective, because something like Uniswap came on the scene, Compound, and Aave, and some of the really early DeFi applications, and people got really excited about them. I remember back 4 or 5 years ago, like regulators were coming to be like, can you explain it? And you'd need to find a lawyer who could come and explain to regulators, including on the US government side. So people just from the conceptually got so interested in it. And then there was all this talk of like, do we need KYC? Do we need this? And got everyone really scared around it. And so I think people were building less and less interesting and simple things. Like the simplest stuff in DeFi is the stuff that's worked best, I think, over time. So I think that's where I come out on that. And to the Uniswap point, like, I mean, Uniswap was way back in the day, the genesis for it was part of Vitalik's idea. So I think he does have at least roots in DeFi, but maybe is not happy with how it has grown up over the past 4 or 5 years.
I mean, he has more than roots in DeFi. I mean, again, it was in the white paper, right? Like he sort of,
Yeah,
in a way, kind of created the entire category.
I mean, again, this is why I think his arguments are the most rational. I think there's some other people whose arguments are currently being lambasted who maybe are a little less self-consistent.
Well, so, I mean, Vitalik also, he criticized USDC, whereas Dankrad was sort of saying, "Oh, we need more RWAs," which
His whole thing was like RWAs for adoption, which is like, I feel like you're not really going to be selling the narrative of crypto. Well, why don't we just go back to using Stripe then?
That was a narrative like 6 or 9 months ago. RWAs for adoption.
Hey, it's not gone. It's not gone. Now,
here's what I would say. We're missing the RWA defender on the show today.
I know.
That's true. RIP. So I think the interesting thing about this story to me. So I think the budget stuff is stupid. Like the EF has more than justified $100 million in yearly expenditure for all the value it's created.
And
like if you just think of Uniswap and all the grants they've done.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw Josh Stark's pie chart with that. Like in responses that he put.
I did see that,
which shows the breakdown, and it's like actually quite reasonable. I mean, like, yes, you can say, oh, maybe they could have optimized their spending, but like, what nonprofit in the world has ever successfully optimized its spending? They always are like very different than,
Quite frankly, you actually don't even usually know nonprofit spending because it's so not transparent. So this is like, and there are like UNICEF and some other nonprofits have done these experiments to show donations and expenditure in crypto to enhance transparency.
Right. So, and the EF doesn't take donations, right? Like it is a foundation that was started many years ago with other people's money, not yours.
But it's like the same. It's kind of like what Tom was saying. Like people need something to do. It's it's a slow Twitter week, like that kind of thing.
Well, what I think is most fascinating about the story is that Vitalik retreated from Twitter a while back and basically, just mostly stuck around in Farcaster. And Farcaster just has a very different vibe. It's much less adversarial, much less about price, right? And it seems like he's now come back into the fray in Twitter. He started getting more active and arguing with people again. And it sort of felt like he was almost unprepared for the different vibe on Twitter from when he left to now, which is that now there's just this very, very strong sense that like, no, Vitalik, I know you like invented all this stuff and you're kind of single-handedly responsible for half of this industry existing.
No. Actually, I think you're saying that first sentence you said, I think a lot of the detractors would not even agree with. They'll be like, yeah, whatever. I've heard your name. It's associated with Ethereum. But like all the stuff we're talking about, actually half of the people don't even probably know. Like if you read the comments, you'll see the fights. It's actually, I think there's a sense in which, people who got into crypto in 2021 don't even know the provenance of that type of stuff.
Fine. Okay. So they may not know. They may just know he's like an OG and a famous Ethereum bull, whatever. Fine. But like I think he maybe sort of did not expect the vibe shift that's taken place on Twitter over the last 9 months or so since he's been off in Farcaster land, where like now there's just a lot more despondence in the Ethereum community and a lot more anger about why aren't we shilling as hard as all those other groups, right? And there was this meme where Vitalik wrote some like 10,000 word blog post about governance or public goods or something, and then one of the very first responses was, "Hey, why aren't you bull posting about Ethereum?" And then he puts a meme of a bull with the word Ethereum is good in its mouth, and now that's become a meme of Ethereum is good. So I think it's just like the energy right now on Twitter is just not there for the kind of engagement that Vitalik wants to be having of these very philosophical, like Bitcoin talk style conversations about what is blockchain about, what is the goal of Ethereum. And I think he doesn't fully appreciate the degree to which crypto Twitter has become very PvP and very, very zero sum and very just kind of wound up about the fact that, Ethereum has just been hitting a wall and unable to kind of break through this narrative cage that it feels stuck in.
Yeah. I mean, I just think like there's also just, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't in his position, right? Like I do not envy that position where like whatever you say, you'll get an equal number of 1 million critics on both sides, and you have to kind of like, he's in a tough. I think it's more the other people, like I said, who then piled on, who like where it's like, all right, well,
yeah.
maybe
the only exception to that, the only thing that you will not get negative criticism for is just bull posting Ethereum. But I think that's where his
that's
why
I think he did the greatest the game theory optimal strategy of posting the meme, right? And then right underneath being like, look, this got way more interaction than my post about philosophy. Like you got to give him credit. That was clever.
No, I think it's a sign of the times that Ethereum is hurting, and I think there was a lot more tolerance for navel gazing within the Ethereum community a year ago, but it feels like today it just the Vitalik style sermon doesn't feel like it's resonating in this environment, just because there are just so many Ethereum bag holders who are feeling the pain.
Yeah, to bring this back to ECC, I will say when I was at ECC this summer in July, I did feel like there was a lot of sort of existential thinking going on of what are we doing here, right? It's sort of an identity crisis for builders and stuff like that. Some people are like, okay, we're using this, we're doing payments, things that we talked about right on the financial side. But general, I thought application builders were definitely existential, and even L2 builders and stuff were thinking like, what's happening next? So I do think we're at a pretty existential moment, and so like just going to bull posting is sort of the vibe. The other thing I keep wondering about with Twitter, and I will admit I am 3 weeks Twitter clean.
Oh wow!
Good for you.
What type of rehab did you use beforehand? To get it?
But what I keep wondering about with Twitter, and this is a little bit why I was okay taking myself off for a little while at least, is like, I wonder if the election and the deep division over crypto being used as a political tool has really jaded people so much. And even the people who are engaging in these types of things, like if it just has a pall over everything Twitter-wise, maybe I'm taking the policy and politics side, but I've found the politicization of crypto, which it was real. I mean, to go back to what Vitalik was talking about, that was really not what we were intended to do. If that's really amped up where things are on Twitter now.
Yeah. I think at this point, it's pretty hard to put the genie back in the bottle. I think the Durov situation, the OpenSea situation, they seem to be like, it's kind of everything regalvanizes this conversation, which is how is American policy toward crypto going to shake out?
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to more memes being made from me staring at the ceiling when people talk about regulation too much. So, because that's apparently
okay. I think that's our cue to wrap up. Tarun is about to go on to like an acid flashback.
Well, hey, that was the intern
regulation
who made
too
that
much.
meme. The intern who's probably is maybe Tom, but unknown.
No, it's the intern. It's shout out to the chopping block intern.
Shout out to the intern. If you don't know what we're talking about, check out the chopping block Twitter handle. You can find all the fire memes that our intern is posting, and hopefully we'll get one about Rebecca next. Although I guess you won't see it because you're clean. You're clean from Twitter.
I am, but when people send me things, I click on, read it, and click off.
Okay. Nice. All right. Cool. All right. Rebecca, awesome having you on the show. Hoping we don't have to have you on too much more often because but something tells me that there's going to be more bad things coming our way. All right. That's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
See you all next week.